She mocked the janitor in front of a crowded lobby, convinced he was beneath her notice, unaware that he was actually employed by the Department of Justice and came equipped with a recording device. The morning unfolded much like any other in downtown Phoenix, with the dry heat rising from the pavement, the relentless drone of air conditioners working at full capacity, and people hurrying along, coffees in hand, earbuds in place, with no time to spare. Charlotte Lane Whitmore stepped out of her Uber before the towering glass-fronted building hosting Cantrell and Pierce LLP, one of the most formidable litigation firms in the region. Her heels echoed sharply on the marble floor as she entered, phone pressed firmly to her ear, loudly complaining about a delay in court filings. She wore an ivory pantsuit sharp enough to cut the air, sunglasses perched on her face, and her voice carried more volume than necessary. Just inside the lobby, near the elevators, a janitor was methodically mopping up what appeared to be a spilled iced coffee. He moved deliberately back and forth over the spill, as if that was his sole responsibility for the day. Charlotte noticed him but didn't truly see him. She paused just before the wet floor sign and let out a frustrated groan. The janitor did not look up. He continued mopping. Charlotte tilted her head and removed her glasses. "Excuse me," she said, waving a perfectly manicured hand, as if she were trying to hail a taxi in the late 1990s. "You're blocking the elevator." Still no reaction. He adjusted his mop quietly. She raised her voice, drawing the attention of a security guard sitting nearby at the desk. "Do you speak English?" Finally, the man lifted his gaze. Steady eyes, possibly in their early 50s, slim figure, brown skin, wearing a work shirt with a faded name tag that read D. Carter, quietly said, "Just finishing up here, ma'am." "Well, maybe you should mop before people arrive for actual work. This is not a bus station," she replied. He showed no reaction, no frown, no eye roll, simply looked at her as if she were nothing more than a fleeting cloud. This annoyed her far more than any insult could have. She was not finished. Charlotte continued, gesturing with one hand while holding her phone in the other. "I do not know where you worked before, but in this building, everyone expects things to be spotless before 8 in the morning. It's about maintaining standards. Perhaps ask someone to show you how if you are unsure." He gave a slight nod, signaling understanding. "Good." She stepped around him and pressed the elevator button with more force than necessary, sighing again as if the whole world had somehow let her down. Behind her, the janitor resumed mopping, this time even slower, each stroke deliberate and precise. The elevator doors opened, and Charlotte stepped inside without another word to the front desk. The security guard, a man in his 30s with tattoos visible beneath his sleeves, observed the whole exchange and shook his head slightly. He knew the janitor. A friendly man who always arrived early, did not talk much, but consistently cleaned thoroughly and never left a mess. As the elevator doors glided shut, Charlotte was already on the phone, dialing someone new. "You would not believe the incompetence I just encountered," she said, her voice echoing inside the metal box. Upstairs on the 23rd floor, paralegals and associates were gradually arriving. Charlotte Lane Whitmore headed straight to her office, which was enclosed by glass walls, dropped her bag, and immediately began giving orders. Her assistant had not even taken off her coat yet. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Damian Carter finished mopping the floor, moved the yellow bucket aside, and pulled a phone from his back pocket. He quickly typed a brief message. Subject initiated unprovoked verbal contact at 7:48 a.m. with a dismissive tone and racially coded language, but maintained composure. He saved the note and slid the phone away. Then he proceeded toward the staff elevator in the back, just like he did every morning. What Charlotte did not realize was that she had just unknowingly stepped into the center of a federal investigation, and Damian was not there simply to clean floors. Damian Carter had understood long ago that people reveal their true nature when they believe no one important is watching. This no longer upset him as it once had. He no longer wasted energy on anger, but now observed quietly and carefully. The staff elevator creaked as it slowly ascended from the lobby to the 3rd sublevel, a part of the building rarely visited by tenants. Damian exited, past the boiler room, and entered a locked janitorial supply room. He turned on the overhead light and shut the heavy door behind him. Then, he removed his work shirt to reveal a thin, dark gray t-shirt taped just below the collarbone. He retrieved a slender recorder from his pocket, checked the timestamp, and meticulously transferred the audio to a concealed laptop hidden inside an old cardboard box marked as bleach. With a click of the play button, her voice came through flawlessly, filled with arrogance, dismissal, and carelessness. This was not the first recording of its kind. nor was it likely to be the last. The reality was that Damian Carter had not washed a single floor in almost a year. He worked as a federal prosecutor. Stationed temporarily at the Los Angeles office, he was assigned to a joint task force examining discriminatory hiring and promotion practices within elite law firms across Arizona and Nevada. The investigation had focused on Cantrell and Pierce after two former paralegals, both black women, filed separate grievances a year apart. Human Resources had quietly dismissed each complaint without further action. The grievances themselves were not sufficient to prompt intervention in such a sprawling firm with well-connected lawyers. Yet a troubling pattern was emerging. The Department of Justice demanded a thorough examination, and that was where Damian came into play. Raised in Bakersfield, his mother was a house cleaner and his father a freight driver. He understood all too well what it meant to be overlooked, to be treated as invisible. He recalled teachers mispronouncing his name annually and classmates mocking it as if it were a joke. But he harbored no resentment. He had escaped those circumstances, graduated from law school, and secured a position with the U.S. Attorney's Office. When the chance arose to work undercover on a lengthy discrimination investigation, he accepted immediately. He grasped the task in a manner others failed to. Over the past half-year he had worked in 6 separate buildings. Disguised as maintenance staff, no one ever questioned his identity. No one looked beyond the uniform. Cantrell and Pierce had been marked early for subtle conflicts, excessive employee turnover, stalled advancements, and something more troubling, a subtle sense of superiority that was difficult to prove, but simple to sense. Damian's role was not to gather emotions, although that happened, but to obtain evidence. Each morning he punched in before 6, studied his previous notes, then headed upstairs carrying a mop and bucket, just like any other cleaner, yet every mop handle concealed a recording device. Every trash bag contained tiny cameras hidden near the seal, and every casual question he posed, such as, "What time is the partner meeting?" or, "Are you working late again tonight?" was deliberate. He was constructing a network, a web of names, discussions, offhand remarks made in elevators and break rooms. Words spoken when people assumed they were alone, and Charlotte, she was merely another name until today. Today she crossed a line publicly before witnesses on a building's surveillance camera. That transformed her from a mere name into someone worth investigating. Damian shut the laptop, packed it away, and closed his duffel bag. He did not despise Charlotte. In truth, hatred rarely played a part. What he felt was frustration at how effortlessly people remained unseen, dismissed and belittled. How many individuals like Charlotte Lane Whitmore had been present in rooms where laws were shaped and choices were made that impacted families resembling his own? He paused by the entrance, ran his hand over his closely shaved head, and exhaled deeply. Then he slipped the janitor's shirt back on, buttoned it up completely, and returned to his duties as if nothing had happened. Yet above the floor he had just left, Charlotte was already settling in. Too settled, which meant Damian Carter faced even more challenges ahead. Charlotte Lane Whitmore never knew how to stop. She moved through her days as if racing against an unseen clock, always speaking quickly, forever ahead of herself. In her corner office suite with windows spanning from floor to ceiling and a leather chair worth more than some used vehicles, she commanded attention without ever raising her voice. Clients admired her because she was unstoppable. Colleagues respected her because she kept winning. But there was another reason few dared to confront Charlotte, and it was not only about her success, it was about her sharp tongue. She had a knack for remarks that sounded like praise until they landed with a sting. She called it honest communication. Her assistant referred to it differently, though never aloud. That morning, after the encounter in the lobby, Charlotte barely recalled it happening to her. It was just another exasperating incident, one more on a long list beneath her notice. She had already returned to her usual routine, slamming the phone onto the desk. Charlotte Lane Whitmore was demanding depositions, questioning who had authorized a motion that did not bear her name. Candace, speaking through the glass wall, asked why there were 3 errors in the brief from the previous day. Candace's assistant entered with a tense expression and replied, "I did not edit that document." Charlotte blinked and inquired why Candace had not reviewed Travis's work more carefully, knowing he was not prepared for that kind of precision. Candace wanted to insist she was not a babysitter, but instead gave a single nod and stepped back. Charlotte shook her head quietly, muttering that one job is all they have, just one. It was not the first time those words had come from her lips. By midday, Charlotte had handled 3 client calls and firmly shut down a junior partner who questioned her deadlines. She ate half of a salad at her desk and discarded the rest when she found the dressing unpleasant. Then she entered the partners' lounge, which was mostly silent with only two others present. Bryce Everly, a tax law specialist in his mid-50s with an unyielding tie and personality, and Jeanette Olaf, an astute observer in corporate mergers and acquisitions. Charlotte poured coffee and glanced out the window. "Do you see the new janitor down below?" she asked. Bryce remained silent. Jeanette raised an eyebrow and remarked that the janitor moved like he was paid by the hour to think. Charlotte laughed and spilled some coffee, explaining it took 10 minutes to clean, which made her late for the elevator. Jeanette stirred her tea slowly and suggested maybe he was just thorough. Charlotte waved her hand dismissively, saying it was more than that. There was a feeling, as if he was watching everyone. He did not say much, probably not grasping half of what was going on around him. Bryce eventually looked up and said, "Charlotte." "What?" "I did not say anything offensive. I am just mentioning that some individuals do not fit certain settings. This is not about racism, it is about common sense," she replied. Janet set her cup down and argued, "Actually, it does sound a bit racist." Charlotte chuckled and said, "Oh, come on, you know me. I have no racist tendencies, I simply believe in standards. Everyone should know their place." Janet remained silent while Bryce returned to his spreadsheet. The tension lingered briefly, before Charlotte left, holding her coffee as if nothing had happened. She thought not about what she said, but about how easily people got offended nowadays. Raised in Flagstaff, she earned a scholarship to Arizona State and fought hard through law school, surrounded by men who doubted her constantly. She secured her position, so why should she not expect the same from others? What Charlotte failed to notice was how her idea of standards followed a familiar pattern, one that usually favored her, granting the benefit of the doubt to those who looked and sounded like her. She especially missed the fact that someone was paying attention. Damien, however, caught every word, and now he had enough information to trace her behavior further back than she imagined. Downstairs in the supply room behind the boiler tanks and barrels of chemicals, Damien sat quietly on a folding chair. Wearing earbuds, he listened carefully to the unedited audio from the partner lounge captured by the microphone Damien Carter had secretly placed in the break room's wall outlet 3 days earlier. The recording revealed everything from Charlotte Lane Whitmore's laughter and remarks to the uncomfortable silence that followed. The device exceeded expectations, capturing every nuance and subtle pause, the kind that exposed true feelings. He saved the file and backed it up onto a secured flash drive. Before forwarding a copy to the Department of Justice case lead in Los Angeles, he refrained from adding any comments. The audio was powerful enough on its own and always had been. Reviewing his internal notes, he noted Charlotte was not the only one at that firm making questionable statements or behaving dismissively, but she was by far the most reckless and outspoken. Signs of deeper issues appeared as well, including unusual promotion patterns, whispers among paralegals about strange questions during interviews, and anonymous emails sent to human resources that vanished into oblivion. Until now, Charlotte had once been mere noise. She was now a thread worth pulling, which meant examining the situation more closely. That same afternoon, Damien switched buildings within the company. 3 janitorial employees worked across the Cantrell and Pierce Towers, each responsible for a different floor cluster. They rarely encountered one another, but today Damien volunteered to cover the 23rd floor while a colleague tended to minor repairs. He acted discreetly so as not to cause suspicion, merely needing access. At exactly 3:20 in the afternoon, he wheeled his cart into the executive wing. With his head bowed and his earpiece active, no one gave him a second glance, just another pair of gloves and a mop bucket. He cleaned silently outside Charlotte Lane Whitmore's office, while she was engaged in another call, this time concerning a forthcoming settlement. She spoke rapidly as usual. "I do not care what he says. I want this wrapped up by Friday. If the client tries to delay, we remind him who signs the checks. If that bothers him, he can take his business to one of those boutique law firms in Tucson." There was a brief pause followed by laughter. "Do not worry. They will not. People like to believe they have choices." Damien Carter moved slowly, wiping the same spot on the glass partition for nearly 3 minutes. At one moment, Charlotte glanced up and saw him through the window. He gave a small wave which she ignored, turning quickly back to her conversation and commenting, "These people forget that they work for us, not alongside us." That was enough. He stepped away before she could notice him paying attention. Later that evening, after most of the office had emptied, Damien returned to the break room. Reaching beneath one of the chairs near the table, He retrieved a second microphone he had hidden earlier in the week. He scrolled through the recordings. Charlotte was on the line again, this time speaking to Travis, a junior associate. "Do you want to become a partner here?" she asked. "Here is the trick. Speak like them, dress like them, work harder than them, but never act like you are here to change anything. They do not want fresh energy. They want reflections." Travis let out a nervous laugh. Unsure and just trying to keep afloat, Charlotte Lane Whitmore warned, "Do not swim too far from the shore. People end up drowning when they forget they are not built for the deep water." The figurative language was worn out, yet the message remained crucial. Damian Carter closed his notebook, recorded a brief voice memo, and saved it on the backup drive. The investigation was progressing quietly but methodically, with evidence steadily accumulating and Charlotte leading the effort without even realizing it. Still, one vital clue was missing, and Ashlyn was aware of it. It would not be long before she personally delivered it to him. Friday morning arrived heavy with tension. Although no one uttered it aloud, there was no memo, no email, no scheduled meeting, just an unspoken strain hanging over everything. Damian noticed it the instant he stepped into the lobby. People moved a bit faster, gripped their phones more tightly, and kept their conversations unusually brief. Charlotte did not seem to register any of this. She confidently entered at 8 o'clock, her sunglasses on, phone already pressed to her ear. By 8:13, she was reprimanding a paralegal loudly for printing the wrong deposition draft. "Are we hiring high schoolers now?" she shouted down the hallway, her voice reverberating along the glass walls. The paralegal, a soft-spoken woman named Amanda, quietly apologized, eyes fixed to the floor. Charlotte snorted in response and strode on without another word. Nearby, Damian was cleaning the water cooler as Amanda passed him on her way to the copier room. She said nothing, but her expression conveyed enough. By noon, Charlotte was unmistakably in a foul mood. A client had withdrawn from an upcoming arbitration, blaming her for using an overly aggressive tone. She, in turn, put the blame on Travis. They were seated in her office, the blinds halfway closed. Damian stood just 2 doors down, pretending to fix a slow leak in the kitchenette sink. "You told them we would seek maximum damages, right?" she snapped. Travis hesitated. "I repeated exactly what you said during the call." Then she demanded, "Why am I getting an email from the client saying he feels intimidated by the language used? Do you think that came from me? They would never speak to me like that. You must have softened it, or worse, completely messed it up." Travis replied, "I did not. I read your words verbatim." Charlotte stood up and suggested, "Maybe your expression conveyed something different. Perhaps they saw you and thought, oh, this guy is not the fierce person I expected." Travis blinked. "Excuse me. Do not get sensitive." Charlotte waved a hand dismissively. "You know how this works. You have to project confidence. Make people take you seriously. Right now you appear like a graduate school intern, not someone destined to be a partner." After a pause, she added, "If you intend to stay here, stop acting as if you are different. It does not matter where you come from or what group you identify with. Just do the job. That is how we earn respect, not by pushing diversity targets or trying to impress the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee." Outside, Damian slowly closed the wrench set and paused for a moment. That was the moment he realized he did not need to investigate further. Charlotte Lane Whitmore had admitted the truth herself on tape in her office, without showing any hesitation. Later that day, Damian Carter made one last entry in his log, where he recorded the time, date, location, keywords used, and their significance to the investigation. The file was labeled as Escalation Trigger. At 3:42 in the afternoon, he stepped outside the building and made a brief call to his contact at the Department of Justice. "We are ready to proceed," he said. There would be no flashy arrests or press briefings. This was a different process. A quiet internal audit request was sent to the company's board of directors. A letter marked Time-Sensitive Personnel Ethics Review was delivered Monday morning. On the very same day, 2 federal attorneys entered the premises pretending to be prospective clients. One attorney joined a partner for a planned tour, while the other asked for a private meeting with the head of human resources. By the middle of the week, rumors were spreading like smoke trapped in a closed room. Human Resources sent an email across the entire firm, reminding everyone that internal communications could be examined. Shortly after, a second message followed stating that if employees believed they had witnessed or experienced misconduct at work, they should come forward. Some employees came forward, while others did not need to because the recorded evidence was speaking for itself. Charlotte still had no idea what was coming, but the silence growing around her was more than just awkward. It was deliberate. Before long, she would understand just how chilling that kind of silence could be. The change was barely noticeable at the beginning. Charlotte realized it during the Tuesday morning meeting of the partners. People who normally greeted her with nods or half smiles suddenly avoided her entirely. Bryce, who always sat to her left, deliberately chose a seat farther away, avoiding her glance. Jeanette kept her replies brief, maintaining an even tone. Even Candace, her assistant, became quieter than usual. She passed on messages without pausing, replied only to direct questions, and no longer pretended to laugh at Charlotte Lane Whitmore's sarcasm. Charlotte assumed it was due to stress. There had been a great deal of pressure lately, and everyone was overwhelmed with work. Perhaps someone had leaked rumors about her client's losses. Or maybe the Human Resources Department was becoming stricter once again. Those emails about misconduct and anonymous tips probably unsettled everyone. She did not worry. But in hindsight, she should have, because by Wednesday events started to accelerate rapidly. The firm's managing partner, Elliot Greaves, called for an urgent mandatory meeting with all senior staff. Such meetings rarely happened without prior warning, which annoyed Charlotte even before she entered. The conference room was crowded, and everyone appeared restless. Elliot stood at the head of the table, a thick folder lying before him. "This will not take long," he said, his voice strained. "We have received a formal investigation notice from the Department of Justice concerning internal conduct, promotion procedures, and discriminatory actions. The notice includes verified audio evidence recorded by a federal official working undercover." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Charlotte looked up, puzzled. She had not heard anything about this investigation and scanned the room searching for explanations, but most people avoided eye contact. "We are cooperating fully," Elliot continued, "including providing all relevant communications, evaluating partnership options, and conducting individual interviews. The Department of Justice has identified several key people of interest. They have already spoken with our compliance team, and some of you will be contacted directly." That phrase, individuals of interest, hit like shattering glass. Charlotte felt a flush of heat rise behind her ears. "Does anyone know who they are?" someone asked. Elliot did not reply, but instead opened a folder and placed the first document on the table. It was a printed transcript of a conversation with the heading Partner Lounge Audio File 027. Charlotte's stomach churned. She did not need to read it to recognize her own voice saying, "I would like to speak with you privately." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "You will have your opportunity during the formal interview." Charlotte interrupted. "Elliot, if this is about that janitor—" He raised a hand to stop her. "This is not about a janitor. It's about all of them, how they are treated, and how you deal with people you believe cannot impact your career." She froze in place. The room fell silent. Someone whispered, "She's on it." Charlotte grabbed her bag and walked out, her heels clicking loudly down the corridor. A sound that once commanded respect, but now resembled panic. Meanwhile, down on sub-level 3, Damien stood wearing a different outfit. No mop, no gloves, no D. Carter badge. Instead, he wore a charcoal gray blazer, neatly pressed pants, and carried a simple leather case with his credentials tucked inside. When he stepped into the elevator, security did not question him at 2:05 in the afternoon. He proceeded directly to the firm's Human Resources office, where 2 senior lawyers and a compliance officer awaited him. There was no drama, no grand spectacle. He calmly opened his folder, handed over the final report, and stated, "Everything you require is all inside." When asked to verify his identity, he provided his full name and title: Damian R. Owens, Assistant United States Attorney for the Civil Rights Division. Upstairs, Charlotte sat at her desk, eyes fixed unblinking on her computer screen. She had yet to receive a scheduled interview time, but that no longer mattered. She felt the pressure mounting, the walls closing in around her. Her name appeared in the transcript, her voice on the recordings, her candid comments included in the official complaint lodged by 2 associates currently working at the firm and 1 intern who had been present in the break room months earlier. Quietly taking notes, what she'd considered harmless remarks were now categorized as patterns of bias and verbal harassment. Nobody had come to remove her, yet nobody stood up for her either. As Charlotte sat in her glass-walled office engulfed in silence, a harsh truth settled in. Respect cannot simply be demanded. It must be earned, and when lost, it is not easily regained. Exactly 1 week later, Charlotte was gone. There was no formal announcement or declaration to the entire firm. Her name disappeared entirely from the company directory, and the plaque outside her office was taken down. Her assistant Candace silently packed up the desk contents and left the boxed items with security for collection by an unknown party. Many feigned surprise, while most quietly whispered throughout the office. She was pushed out without any severance pay. They uncovered more than just the recordings. There were emails too, but no one voiced anything openly. It was as if they were discussing a shadow. Someone who once existed had now been erased. On the 23rd floor, Travis sat at a new workspace. His tone carried greater authority now. He had not altered his character, yet the way people heard him changed. Jeanette assumed responsibility for most of Charlotte Lane Whitmore's clients. Bryce began arriving earlier, more focused, showing subtle changes, genuine ones. The company culture did not transform instantly, but something had shifted. Downstairs, in a small conference room rented by the Department of Justice, a group of employees gave statements behind closed doors. Damian Carter sat among them, not as a janitor or the lead investigator, but as someone there to listen, to be present, to remind everyone that their words mattered. One of the paralegals, Amanda, spoke for the first time before a legal authority after years of silence. Her voice was shaking in the beginning but grew steady as she described the reality. She detailed how remarks were often masked as jokes and how prejudice was ingrained in the quiet that followed. Damian did not interrupt because it was unnecessary. By the conclusion of the hearing, she looked relieved, not joyful, but lighter. After everything finished, Damian packed his documents and prepared to return to Los Angeles. Outside the building, on a shaded bench near the intersection of Monroe and 2nd Avenue, Charlotte Lane Whitmore sat for a moment observing the passers-by. Business people, bike couriers, a teenage girl arguing with her mother over the phone, a delivery worker pushing a cart full of food, blending into the scene just like always. Then a young man from the building, someone from accounting, walked past, stopped briefly, and turned around. "Hey," he said. "You work down in janitorial, right?" Damian Carter looked up calmly. "I did. Are you still with the firm?" "No, I just finished what I came to do." The man hesitated for a second. "You were always cool to me. I just wanted to say I didn't realize you were, you know." Damian smiled. "That's the point." They shook hands quickly with no fuss, just a simple gesture exchanged between two people who had shared the same space, even if only for a short time. Later that day, Damian gave a private talk at Arizona State University's law school. It was not a grand speech with cameras, just a room filled with students and a handful of faculty members. He shared his story without using names or recordings, but conveyed its meaning. "People will tell you power looks a certain way," he explained. "They say it dresses a certain way, talks a certain way, and listens only to itself. But the truth is, power is not about loudness or rank. It shows in what you do when nobody is watching, in how you treat the person cleaning your office, not the one signing your paycheck." He paused to let it sink in, then added one more thing. "Never assume that someone you look down upon lacks the ability to transform your life." The students applauded not as if watching a performance, but as if they had grasped something genuine. That evening, Damian Carter flew back home quietly. He did not share the event online or tell anyone what he had accomplished. He returned to his job and took on a new case. The mission was the same, but the faces changed. Yet Charlotte Lane Whitmore stayed on his mind, not because she was harsh, but because she was ordinary, the kind of person the system shields until someone dares to ask the right questions. Perhaps that is the true takeaway. Justice does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes softly through those you least expect to see. A year went by. The atmosphere at Cantrell and Pierce LLP was not what anyone imagined. The firm remained standing, still proud of its extensive clientele, and continued to operate from the same polished tower in Phoenix. However, the mood inside had changed. People began to listen more deeply, and some turned towards self-reflection. A few employees left altogether. Charlotte disappeared from the legal scene. Just as abruptly as her name vanished from the firm's website, there was no media coverage or updates on professional networks, no subtle branding on a smaller practice. It was as though she had faded away, not through force, but as a result of consequences. Those who knew her said she had returned to Flagstaff, where her family still held land. One former associate mentioned she had taken up photography, while another believed she was working on a book. The truth remained unknown, and nobody pressed to uncover it. What mattered even more was the space she created within the company, and what filled that void over time. Diversity, equity, and inclusion training became more than just empty promises. Hiring panels grew larger, human resources expanded, and a third-party hotline for confidential concerns was established. Travis, now a seasoned associate, helped design a fresh mentoring system centered on merit without sacrificing individuality. Progress was gradual, but genuine. Meanwhile, Damian Carter took on 3 additional inquiries. After handling the Cantrell and Pierce cases, one involved a medical board in Fresno, another targeted a public university in Nevada, while the third, still in its early phase, hinted at something much broader, possibly national and deeply systemic. Amid all these challenges, Damian managed to dedicate time elsewhere. Just a quarter of an hour away from the firm that once overlooked him, he visited an 11th grade class at South Mountain High School once every month to discuss the law. Not theoretical lessons or case studies, but real-life experiences. One March day, a timid student named Darius raised his hand and asked, "Were you scared when you pretended to be someone else?" Damian paused and replied, "I was not scared. I felt exhausted from watching people being dismissed before they spoke. Tired of witnessing the same voices dominate by default, so I stopped waiting for others to speak up and took action myself." Darius nodded thoughtfully. "Did it work?" Damian smiled and responded, "It depends on what you mean. Did we solve everything? No, but we ignited a spark. Sometimes that is what people overlook. You do not always have to win the entire battle to make a difference. You simply have to refuse to accept defeat." That phrase stayed with the students. One of them even wrote it on a poster. During Black History Month, another student quoted it in her university application essay. Back in his office in Los Angeles, Damian Carter kept the old janitor's uniform inside a plastic bag, hidden in the back of his closet, not as a trophy or even a memento, but as evidence. Evidence that society still judged people by appearances. Evidence that true character still mattered immensely. And evidence that sometimes the strongest person in the room was the one nobody expected. He no longer shared the details of the case. The transcripts were sealed and the files were closed. Yet each time he entered a new space, when people looked at him and underestimated him, he thought of Charlotte Lane Whitmore. He recalled how quickly people revealed their true nature when they believed no one was paying attention. What stayed with him the most was not the headlines or the case paperwork, but the lesson about how easily people forget that respect is not won through job titles or law degrees. It is earned silently, through humility, service, and the way one treats those who seem to have nothing to offer in return. If this story touched you or made you reflect, perhaps reminding you of someone you know, take a moment to consider the places you enter every day. Who do you ignore? Who do you speak over? And who might be quietly observing with intent, not anger? Please like, share, and subscribe for more impactful stories that remind us all that every individual carries their own unique story. And often those who speak the least leave the strongest impression.